Okay, thanks for joining us again today. I'm really excited to bring the second episode in our new series, The Last Taboo. I've got Esther and Emma with me again and lots of questions to answer, all about their different aspects that they want to bring to this conversation. In the first episode, Esther shared some of what it feels like to lose a husband and a son, and we learn some of the ways Emma supported her best friend through this experience. And importantly, how that support didn't end at the funeral or wane after a year or so, but that was an ongoing thing that is still needed all the way through your life, basically, after somebody's died. Emma told us how their stories are intertwined. In helping Esther and her family, Emma discovered a passion for funerals and putting the work in with the family to really help this final send-off be kind of beautifully personalised and full of life. I'm really excited to hear more about this today, as well as discover more about Esther's experience. And I'm also curious to talk to Esther about her job as a carer and the joy she receives from that role. So episode 1 was about the journey, and episode 2 brings us up to date. So we've called it The Present. Okay, so let's get started. Love to see you both again. Emma, you're obviously a real gift to people at a very dark time in their lives. For those of you with friends and relatives who are reaching their last months or years, it might be good for Emma to just share some sort of top tips on how to prepare well for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're talking about people who are maybe approaching end of life or approaching end of life, so maybe not quite there yet, it's just really important to have conversations, to not be frightened about saying, have you thought about what you would like when? And that conversation can be, it can be funeral based. You know, what songs would you like at your funeral, ma'am? You know, or Dad, have you thought about where do you want to be buried or cremated? Or there's actually lots of other options, but we're not got time to go into all of them right now. But you know, have those conversations. And if they poo-poo you and say, well, look, you know, I know you're not going anywhere yet, but when you die, I'm going to be really upset. And it'd be great if I had some tips and advice now so that I could, you know, I don't have to think about those things when I'm in that stage of grief. But you can also talk to them about how they want to be cared for. You know, have they considered what their care needs might be as they progress either into older age or into more infirmity through illness, or you know, whatever stage of life they're at. Do they want to be cared for at home? Would they consider being cared for in a care home? Those are questions that can be asked as well. And you can certainly as well kind of just make sure that you're saying to them, I'm not thinking you're going anywhere now. I just want to get some of these answers down.
Yeah.
But what I would suggest as well is before you have that conversation with them, make sure you know what your own answers are. So you can say to them, well, I know I would consider going in a care home if X, Y, Z. But if this happened, I'd rather stay at home if someone was able to care for me there. Or I know I want to be cremated, and I want to go out to whatever piece of music. Have you thought what you might like? So you're not putting the burden on them to have to make a decision that you're not willing to go through and think through yourself. So I think those are two the main things to think about are the funeral and the kind of advanced care planning. But we'll look a little bit more into the other things that can be looked at when we talk about a bit more about end of life planning facilitation in a little while.
Very succinct, well done. We were talking about keeping our answers succinct, but we so appreciate everyone watching the last episode. So keep with us. We've got lots to say, so that's really good. Yeah, I've not thought about that actually in terms of making sure you know your answers first. It seems a lot more polite to ask and give the feedback that you're going to make yourself vulnerable too. It's like sharing your story about Jesus. You need to be able to tell your story before you start asking someone what they think of the faith and what they think of Jesus and that kind of thing. So that's good. Thank you. Esther, is there anything you'd like to add to that? Is there something you're really pleased you did? I was thinking about weddings and funerals, and I don't know if they're meant to be linked. They sort of are in quite a lot of rom-coms, aren't they? But I know there's a lot of advice about the wedding day and taking snapshots and that run up to the funeral and the funeral, is it something you want to hold in your memory, or is it something you just want to blank out? Is it a personal thing? What kind of things would you recommend to people to do that they'll be able to feel like that was a valid experience, that they've not sort of wasted the experience, and that they can actually look back on it?
That's a really good question, because for most of us, I would say, when we get to the point where we are putting together a funeral for a loved one, it's not something that we've thought about a lot. I think we mentioned this last time, but it was such a surreal moment when the funeral director came to talk to us about our son, and he sat down and he said, "You just let me know what you want." And first of all, I thought, I've never planned a funeral before. I haven't got a clue. And second of all, what I really want is to not be in this room having this conversation. That was the prevalent thought in my head. Whereas once we'd done Daniel's funeral, and then Richard was only 2 years after that, and then my dad passed away September 2020, which was another 6 years beyond that. The weird thing about planning my dad's funeral, even though it was sudden, it was completely unexpected, and it was just in a moment, his heart gave way and that was it. But when we got together to plan the funeral, I remember thinking, I know what to do, and I have a much better idea of it, which was kind of sad. I thought, I'm sad that I know what to do. But we also had this real strong sense of, this is an incredible moment. A funeral is the summary of somebody's life. It's a very overwhelming thought of, this is the last big thing I can do for this person. And so just like you say about the wedding day, I think for us, we really said, if we could encapsulate as much as you ever could somebody's life in, an hour and a half or even a day of being together, what would we include in that? And there's some big questions there, and a lot of it is about celebrating their life, isn't it? And saying, what was it about this person that drew us to them? What influence did they have? Similar to what we said last week about the cards and things like that, having that opportunity for people to share their stories is phenomenal. So with each person, I think we try to look at who is someone that was really close to them, but also is prepared to do this, because very often it's not the spouse or even the children of the person or the parents of the person who can get up and do it. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's not. So finding someone that's still extremely close. And so for my dad, because I'm one of 4 siblings, we did it together. We wrote something together. We added lots of his humour into it. He loved cracking jokes. We tried to get as many jokes in there as possible while giving a very authentic overview of his life. But we also got a couple of his brothers to stand up and talk about him as well. And a huge thing for our family, because we are Christians, because we've all given our lives over to serving God and to helping other people find out about him, every single one of these funerals, whether it was an 8-year-old or a 64-year-old, it was, how can we communicate to people why this person lived their life the way that they did, the motivation behind it. And if they had the choice, if they could stand here with the eyes of everybody that knew them on them in this moment, what would they want to say to point to God? So taking the opportunity from the front in the eulogies, and also, when you have the order of service, trying to make sure that there was their story in there that people could then take and take it home. In my dad's case, it was all on YouTube because it was during COVID, so we couldn't have everybody at the funeral anyway. And that was really significant, actually. It was like a shame, but we also felt like God used it in a powerful way, because I think it was over 1,000 people in the end watched the funeral, which normally you wouldn't get 1,000 people at a funeral. And it's there online for however long, so people can go back to it and hear the message that they have lived their life trying to communicate. So when you talk about those snapshots, because I remember doing that on my own wedding day, I mustn't forget this, I mustn't forget that. I definitely did do it actually at the funeral, of just that moment of looking around going, look at all these people that are here to celebrate somebody who I love. This person's here. At Richard's funeral, we said to people, wear something that reminds you of Richard. So a lot of us came in camo stuff or whatever. And one of my friends who went on a diving holiday with Richard, he just turned up wearing his snorkel. sure most of the people were like, what the actual heck? But for me, that was so significant because they were each other's dive buddies and it meant so much. And he just had that round his neck at the time and it was beautiful. And again, going back to my dad's funeral, because it's the most recent, it's the one that's sticking in my mind. Something I'd never thought of before, because it's an old tradition, is that idea of, you know, as the cortege, I can never remember the actual name, comes along. You know, when people stand by the side of the street and they take their hats off or whatever. Because we couldn't have everyone at the funeral, what we did was we had 30 of us there, and then another 30 had gathered as a church service somewhere else, and another 30 somewhere else. So we had a really long procession from the church back to where he was going to be buried. And we deliberately took the cars past the other places where people had come to watch his funeral. And so all those people were stood lined up, and it was a drizzly day. We had no idea that so many people were going to be there, and it was overwhelming. We were sobbing in those cars because there were so many faces. There were farmers who he knew because he worked with farmers that came and stood near those significant points, because we'd communicated this, we'd sent it out by email, this will be the procession. So we'd enabled people, we'd equipped people with, this is an option if you want it, but we'd never imagined that it was just dozens and dozens of people from so many different chapters of our lives. And that stuck with me. When I went to bed that night, I was trying to replay, because we live in such an age, don't we, where normally we take our cameras out, our phones out in moments when we want to, I want to capture this, but obviously that's not appropriate at a funeral. And that night I lay in bed thinking, I can't believe this person came, and this person came down from Morecambe, and this person travelled up for that, and it meant so much. So in the next few months, when we knew, me and my mum, when we knew of other people who lost loved ones during COVID that couldn't have the big funerals, we did the same. We just went and stood outside the church at the moment that we knew that the friends and family would be coming out, and it was significant to them. So all of these things, I think, are just, it's the snapshots. Let's capture it, let's make it significant, because it brings so much peace to us as well on the other side of trying to live a life without somebody that we love.
Yeah, I would just add to that, if you are working with a minister or a celebrant who's putting that service together, ask them beforehand to make sure that they give you a full copy, a printed copy of the service. That includes everything. So when I do a service, if I've got somebody else in the family who's going to come and speak, I ask them to send me what they're speaking beforehand, because that's important, so you know what your time limits are as well.
Yeah.
But I put the whole service together and put it like in a presentation pack, and the family get that. Because I often say, you know, you're not going to necessarily take everything in on the day. And I have normally emailed it to them as well, but that's different. This is something to keep. And some families say that they want it, some families say they don't, and that's fine. And I would just say, because attitudes are changing and attitudes to funerals are changing, if you want to take photos at a funeral, I don't think that's that bad anymore. And particularly if you've done something really unique, so you've got a unique coffin or a unique floral display, or you've got someone who's come wearing a snorkel, you know, then just say, we're going to take some photos, because this is a day that we're celebrating this person's life. And so there are elements of this day that we don't want to necessarily remember, but there are elements that will bring us joy later. So we might, and particularly because so many funerals are now webcast and are available, like they're either videoed or webcast or available on live stream, and taking a photo is not that different to that. Just check with people before you do it. And if it's not your family member's funeral, definitely don't take photos unless you ask the family first. I would just say that. But if it's a funeral that you're organising and that is your loved one, your family member, if you want to take photos, do it.
That's a really good point. I'd not actually thought of that, but yeah, that would be nice. Plus, any little kids that you really feel like, I don't think they can quite cope with coming to the funeral, you can show them pictures of the nice bits, of the flowers and the things that you, like you said, that you've done that are a bit novel and a bit interesting to look at. So that's a really nice idea.
It is, but I would also challenge the thought that you can't bring little kids to a funeral. I don't think any age.
So what do you think about that? Is it definitely a good idea to bring tiny ones?
It's definitely a good idea to give kids the option.
Okay.
So tiny ones, I've had funerals where I've had babies in there, and if the babies cry and things like that, it actually brings a bit of light relief. It can break some of that tension. It's fine. It's that we're in a place of human beings. We're just being human. And if you've got kids who are maybe 3, 4, 5, give them a toy, give them a lollipop, explain to them. It's really important that you explain to them everything beforehand so they know what's happening. And again, if you're working with a good minister or a good celebrant, they will offer to have that conversation with you as well. I will always offer that. And I've worked with families who've said, oh, we're not bringing such and such. I had one family and the mum had died and the little boy was 5, I think. And they said, we're not bringing him to the funeral. And I said, I think I probably overstepped some boundaries. I just said, why? And they said, well, he's too young. I said, is he? And we actually had a full conversation about it. And I said, when he's 10, when he's 15, and you have to, and he asks questions why he wasn't allowed at his mum's funeral, what are you going to say to that? And it is down to every family and every parent to make that decision, but I think kids should be at funerals. They should see what happens. Again, you go back, however many decades, and the bodies were always in the home, and people were around, funerals at any age and every age, but we've sanitized it far too much. We've put death in the hands of hospitals and undertakers, and we've lost touch with what it actually is. But yeah, let kids be involved, and if families say, well, no, I'm not going to bring them, then I always say, do they want to write a letter for granny, or do they want something to go in the coffin for mum, or do they want to write something that I can read on their behalf so that they're actually involved in some way? And I've had families who've taken me up on that and said, yeah, actually, I still think that it wouldn't be right to bring them to the funeral, but I'm going to ask them to do something so that they've played their part in what's going on.
Well, that's really interesting advice, actually, Emma, because I don't think I would have necessarily brought little kids, but hearing that, I think it's a good argument for doing so. I suppose it's whatever is right for the family, but after hearing the advice, because it's like asking an expert on parenting tips, you're better to ask all the things and then go with your instinct than just sort of think, oh, I'll just blindly muddle through without getting any advice on it. So that's good. Okay. Moving on a little bit, I'm just thinking back to Activate. We've got our president, Fiona Castle, is in her 80s, and she's amazing at still travelling around, doing lots and lots of talks. She's just got so many vibrant ideas of how to bring the gospel to life. And she often talks to us about living well in every single season of life. So she'll talk about living well in your 80s and 90s and still being part of what's going on in church. And she still is at toddler group. She's doing the coffee at church. She's on the front desk. So she's very much still involved, and she likes to be in that sort of situation. But we've never actually broached the subject of how to live well and live for Jesus in that very last few days. So when you're actually dying, I just was interested because you both had to be around all this. Is there anything you can share about people you've cared for, maybe, who continued to share God's love right at the very, very end, and they managed to be an amazing witness, amazing evangelists on their deathbed, basically?
Yeah, I think for me, a number of the residents in the care home that I work at who would have professed a really strong Christian faith. I can think of 2 residents in particular towards the end of their life. One lady who was living with quite advanced dementia. So the only things she tended to communicate were she shouted out a lot. She shouted hallelujah, she shouted mammy, and she shouted Jesus.
Wow.
And those were the things that she shouted, really. And often I would go in and visit her. We would sing Jesus loves me, this I know, and she would crack that out, and sing it, and it was beautiful because in my mind, I think if the only thing you can communicate to someone is Jesus loves you, and if that person is repeating back Jesus loves me, this I know, it just brings something really special. In that lady's last days, she wasn't able to communicate the gospel. She wasn't able to tell people how much Jesus meant to her, but there was a real sense of peace in the room. And her family weren't believers. And I remember going into the room literally on the day that she died, and her family were there, and they thanked me for coming along. And they asked me questions about mum's beliefs and where's mum going, what does that mean for us. And it's a really tricky situation because I'm there as chaplain with this organization. There's only certain things I'm allowed to do and things, but then again, being asked direct questions. so I'll tell you direct answers.
Yeah.
And I hopefully communicated what this lady would have wanted as well. So that was really special. And then we had another gentleman. Apologies if you can hear my dogs barking, by the way, the bin men are outside. I had another gentleman who he was a Catholic gentleman, very, very strong faith. And towards the end of his life, he'd gone into hospital and he'd been told that he had a problem with his swallow and he was going to need to be peg fed. And he said he didn't want it. He said, "That's it, I've had enough." So very bravely, he chose to come back to our home, and he did what's known as, he turned his face to the wall. Essentially, it's where someone says, "I've had enough. I'm not going to eat or drink anymore." And that was a conscious decision on his heart. He had capacity to make that decision. And he had about 10 days. He lasted about 10 days. And the only liquids he had were like just some oral mouth care, with a swab and things like that. But he lasted about 10 days. But I've never seen anyone last that kind of period of time who must have been in discomfort to have borne it so well and to have died so peacefully through it. And again, his family said to me, "What is going on here?" And I was able to say, "I think your dad's just at real peace because he knows Jesus, and he's got very much like real strong confidence in in his faith and in what happens to him." So those were my experiences. But I know Esther, your mother-in-law, was an amazing evangelist at the end of her life, wasn't she?
Yeah, so one of the big things that if I could go back and change stuff would be more time with my mother-in-law, because she got diagnosed with cancer 6 months after I got married, and was probably about 2 years into different treatments and things, and then she passed away. But yeah, her heart, I mean, she was just one of the most beautiful characters you could ever meet in your life. She was extraordinary, very, very gentle, but very determined as well. So she'd been a missionary for years and years, so her heart was about telling people about Jesus. And so she used that opportunity whenever she was in for treatment, whenever she had to have extended stays on her regular appointments, all that kind of thing. And so at the end of her life, she just took whatever opportunity she could. And talk about that sense of peace, it was just there. I remember her saying to me and Richard, as newlyweds, she said, "I have no regrets because I said yes to anything I felt that God might be asking us to do." And she was only 47 when she passed away. Or was she 48? But she was still young. But she set an example for us within the way she lived her life. I've always been ready to say yes to God in every season, every circumstance, but also in the way that she died as well. And I think for us as a family, it really gave us this positive impact of, I think it did instill in something in Richard about, you never know how much time you've got, because then he lived life extremely quickly and tried to pack as much as he could into it. But it also for us set that sense of no fear of death. And we spent a lot of time then with Daniel and Richard in the, when it's like the final season and it's sort of in hospital and then hospice situations, and really experienced the same. I remember with Daniel just this sense that he had of peace, which for an 8-year-old I think is quite unusual. And sometimes the nurses would come in and treat him. At one point he ended up with his skin reacted really badly to the chemotherapy, and it was very, very tender, and they had to come in and treat it like a burn. And the nurses had come in and done that, and as they'd finished, he just said thank you to them when they finished. And this nurse just burst into tears. She said, "I've never had a child thanking me when I've been treating their burns before." And he would notice because it was in Manchester, there was a lot of people that would come in, maybe it might be their first job if they've come from another country, so immigrants might come in and they would do the cleaning and changing the bins and things like that. Very little English, and a lot of them, you got the sense they weren't really used to people interacting with them. But whenever they came in to change Daniel bins, they'd always say thank you very much, or how are you, and they were like, oh, and they were really like impacted by that. So it's true that when you're facing something like that, you don't realize how many eyes are actually on you, how many people are saying, oh my goodness, what would I do in that situation? Because we live our whole lives with this mysterious concept of what would our last days be like if you have a build up to it. I know for some people it's very sudden. So when we see somebody in that time, we do sit up and listen and take notice. And for the staff in hospitals and hospices, they must see all sorts of different reactions and different ways that people handle the end of life. So it's almost like your voice, your actions are amplified in that moment. And in the last few years with social media, that's been different as well, because it's not just the people that come to visit you in that time. It is, as a family, what you post up about that time. We have video, we have picture, we have things that everything's just captured more, isn't it, and able to be shared more. So it is really significant how we handle that. And we have to be honest. I mean, it'd be awful to think that people were spending their last weeks or months trying to put on a brave face instead of being authentic. But I think there is you can do both. You can be authentic about, I'm afraid, and I don't, Richard was like, I don't even want to think about the fact that I might not be here anymore. He couldn't imagine how we as a family were going to cope without him, but he had some of those tough conversations with other people that he trusted, like his brother-in-law and his dad and that kind of thing. He even had them more with them than with me, because we were just all about staying in the moment and and hoping for a miracle. But it meant that, I would say those last days were done really well.
That's really fascinating. Thank you for sharing all that. Okay, next one was, have you been able to lead people to faith as you work through their death plan and talk about dying? So Emma, is there any time, I know you probably are stuck because of what the kind of like overarching expectations are for you in your job, not to overstep the mark, but is there any moment that you can think, I took them one step further, or I've helped to give them an option sort of at the very end to make a decision?
Yeah, I think what I think is really interesting is my work as a chaplain over the last 5 years has given me an understanding of a more generous grace, I would say. And I think I've come to a place where I'll have those conversations with residents, because this will be particularly relevant with residents in the care home. And again, it's any direct question that's asked, I can answer, but we're not allowed to proselytize. That's the organisation's standpoint. But I can answer direct questions, and I am there as a Christian chaplain, so there are a lot of things that I can say. So this idea of a more generous grace is that I think there are a number of residents and a number of people in general, I think, who maybe have never confessed with their mouth, that they choose to follow Jesus. But in those moments on that deathbed, something happens between them and God. And I was definitely, this was, take me back a few years, and I would have been like, you have to pray the sinner's prayer, you have to, and all this kind of stuff. And I just keep coming back to the thief on the cross. The thief on the cross didn't have a chance to put anything into action. All he did was say, I acknowledge who you are, Jesus. I know that I've messed up, and I acknowledge who you are. And I just keep coming back to that with my residents. And for me, that gives me a great sense of hope as well. So I wouldn't say that any residents have necessarily like verbalized a decision to follow Jesus in those last moments, but I have seen changes in people. So I've got a much broader, generous understanding of grace than I used to. And I think I'll be surprised at who I might bump into when I get up there.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see. Oh, that's lovely. Okay, we're going to move on just a little bit, because I wanted to take the opportunity to just ask Esther a little bit about her current job, and then I'm going to end by asking Emma about her current job and plans for the future. So that's how it's going to end up. So Esther, after caring for Daniel and Richard, you now work in the caring profession too. Am I right? Yes.
Yeah.
I've only seen this on social media. I've not actually talked to you about it yet. So I've just seen you posting things, how much you just love sitting with them, taking them to things, going to the Bird of Prey sanctuary, just lovely things that you post that you're doing with them. What keeps you going? Because I do know from talking to various different carers, it's a massively challenging profession at the minute in terms of the pay and the expectation and the hours and the shifts. Have you got some encouragement for other carers that are trying to keep working through it and trying to keep dedicated to the role?
Yes, so I am a support worker for it's a house that has 4 disabled residents. So it's not end of life, but it is that, like you say, it's within the caring profession, and I suppose really that the big thing for me, one of the motivating factors behind it, is when we looked back on Daniel's life, Richard and I, we had all these conversations towards the end of his life. It looked like an arc. So, you know, when you have a newborn baby and they're in your life and they can't do anything at all, like I think every new parent is stunned at how little a newborn baby can do. You can feed them, you can put a teat in its mouth, and when it breaks off, it's like this looking over here for the teat that was there, and you're like, man, it can't even like work out what direction to look in or anything like that, and it's months before they can sit up or move. So you're not caring for them because of, you know, it's not like a reciprocal relationship of I'm doing this for you, you're going to do this for me. But there's a goal, isn't there? As a parent, you see your child to become you want them to become competent, you want them to learn new skills, with the idea that you're going to bring them, it's like a, you know, a straight line up there like that, to the point where they're fully functioning in society, can take care of themselves. So obviously with most children, that's what happens. And with Daniel, it was like this beautiful arc where we got up to about the age of 6. And then because of the condition that he had that was in his brain that was affecting the rest of his body, he then lost a lot of the ability. So he lost his independence. He wasn't able to go to school because he was having multiple seizures. So he had to be with one of us all the time. So we had to homeschool him. He ended up losing the ability to hold a pen or to walk. So we had to do all of those things for him. And then towards the end of his life, like his vision and everything happened. And you know, he was just lying in a hospital bed. We did everything for him. We had to bring him food. We had to change his pads, all that kind of thing. And it was like him going back to the state of being a newborn baby, except we had this privilege of still being able to interact with him because he never lost that, which was fantastic. And it brought something out of me and Richard that was just so pure and so basic and so kind of in touch with the basics of humanity and relationship. And as I said before, Richard lived his life 100 miles an hour. He was Mr. Productivity. Like, how much can I pack into a day? You know, he was spending his days, a couple of years previous to that, we were renovating a house. He was trying to lead a church. He was working a full-time job. He was trying to meet up with all the different pastors in the area of where we were. He was just packing it all into his day. But when Daniel was in those final months, we just had to focus on caring for our kids, being in the hospital with him, doing everything at the pace that it just happened in front of us, not necessarily controlling things or changing things or fixing things. We just were with him. And it changed us. It changed our relationship with one another. We had to slow down the way we spoke to each other. It changed the way that we saw life as well. It reminded me of way back before we were in hospital with Daniel. My youngest son, Levi, he was only like, I don't know, 14 months, fell off a chair, managed to snap both bones in his arm, took him in, he had to stay overnight. And in the parents area at Lancaster Hospital, I met a dad who, since his son was born, they realised there was something severely wrong with him, and they'd lived in the hospital for, I think it was months at that stage, maybe 6 months. And I was like, oh, how does anybody do this? Oh my goodness. And the guy said, he said, every morning I used to drive up and down. I used to commute to Manchester. My day was really busy. I was like at work all the time. He said, I could never tell you the colour of the sky that day. Could never tell you what it looked like out the window. He said, since my son's been born, and basically they knew that he wasn't going to survive, so they were just with him as much as they could in those months. He said, I look out every single morning and I breathe in and I feel like I'm connected with life, I'm connected with myself, I'm connected with him and my wife. He said, it's changed everything. And that little encounter with that stranger years previously affected how I saw that time with looking after Daniel. And so when Richard became ill, he actually had said, joked about it years previously, you know, when I go, I want to go quickly. I don't want to be in a care home. I don't want to lose any kind of function or facility. That would be my worst nightmare. Well, there he was at 38 years old. He lost the ability to walk. He had to be cared for around the clock. But it changed the way he saw it, because we'd said to each other, it's a privilege to do these things for Daniel, the most basic of human functions. And when he was in those final weeks, I said to him, can I do some of this stuff for you? Can I care for you? Can I bring you this stuff? And he let me do it. And I don't think he would have done if we hadn't have gone through what we went through with Daniel. I think he just would have been angry at, at needing the care in the first place. So all of this stuck with me. And whenever I was out and about and I saw someone with, if they were looking after their own child, or if they were a carer, they were looking after somebody who was visibly disabled, there was a part of me that had that sense of, oh, there's something so sweet and beautiful about that. So when I was looking for employment a while ago, I looked at a few different things. I thought, you know what, I'm just going to have a go. I'm going to apply, because there's always these care jobs around. Now, and like you say, Rachel, you hear some accounts of it and it sounds like it's really hard. You're rushed off your feet all day, and if you make a single mistake, the consequences of it can be really difficult. But I just went for it. Sometimes you think, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just going to say yes. Did the training. I found myself working in this house with there's round the clock staff, so I'm never sort of doing it on my own, with these 4 residents between the age of 19 and 50 odd, of different abilities. One's in a wheelchair, most of them are non-verbal, and I absolutely love this job. I've been there for nearly a year, but it's all those same feelings of, I get to be there for you. I get to help you with the most basic of human functions. I get to spend all day with you trying to help you with different things, and I get one smile at the end of it. And that one smile, oh my goodness, it's worth 100 smiles from somebody else who can't really, because that person very rarely can make eye contact or acknowledge things. And it's just lovely. So the job satisfaction is immense. And I do bring it back to faith. I do bring it back to how we were created. We were created for connection. We were created for intimacy.
Yeah.
And in that same sense of, a newborn baby doesn't need to do anything to earn worth or connection. They're just the fact that they are made in the image of God, and we get to connect with them and care for them. I think that's what God loves us to do for one another. And in this age of productivity, I know it sounds like a cliche, but we spend so much of our day trying to fit things in, seeing our worth of what we've produced and what we've done, or how many things are still left on our list to do. I love going to work, doing a long shift, leaving all of that at home, walking in and just saying, how can I interact with these guys today in a way where I can see that little spark in their eyes that says, oh, I've really enjoyed this.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's lovely to hear such a positive story of it. Thank you. You obviously were definitely meant to do that job.
Yeah.
Okay, Emma, just now for you to finish off for us. Could you tell us some of the ways you're developing your services? Basically, I know you're training in a new area here. Tell us what it is, tell us all about it, and then end by telling us how we can find out more about you and maybe connect with you or other people like you that are doing similar jobs.
Fantastic. Yeah. So obviously I've done funerals for a number of years, and I think I mentioned in the last video, my business is called Dying to Help. But I wanted to do more. I wanted people to talk about death, to talk about dying, to talk about funerals, and to have a plan. And then I discovered that there's actually a job where you can do that. So I was really excited. So earlier this year, I signed up on a course to become an end-of-life planning facilitator with an organisation called Before I Go Solutions. You can find them on the internet. And actually, I've got a little promo for you. There's a fabulous book here, The Essential Guide to Creating a Good End-of-Life Plan. So it's by Jane Duncan Rogers, who set up Before I Go Solutions. So Jane set up the company after her husband died. And when her husband was unwell, they started to make plans and things like that. But when her husband had died, she had some people staying with her for a while, some friends and things like that. And just as the last person left, a couple of weeks after her husband died, she went to turn on the television and she couldn't get it to work. And she had no idea why the television wouldn't turn on. But she said she knew in that moment that her husband would have known exactly which button to press. And so from that experience grew Before I Go Solutions. And so as an end-of-life planning facilitator, what I can do is I can take people through an online course, and that course covers everything from the house, so that the household basics, lessening the household headaches. So that is where are the manuals for things kept? When's the MOT due on the car? And this is not included, but I like to put it this way. If you were to die tomorrow, would the person you live with, if you live with someone, would they know what day the bins go out? Would they know how the dishwasher works? You know, so the really basic stuff. And you get a workbook, so you can fill in that part of the workbook. You put all that information in. Then it can look at things like, so it looks at a whole spectrum of stuff. So it looks at all your household stuff. You can look at your digital legacy, because we're all online now, and we've all got passwords and accounts and so many different things. So where are you storing those passwords securely, and who else could have access to that to look after that when you go? Social media. Did you know there's a setting on Facebook and on other social medias where you can go in and click how you want your account to be dealt with when you die? And you can either have it memorialized or shut down, but you need to put a person's name on that as to who is going to look after that for you. So we'll look through all the digital stuff as well. We'll look through the legal stuff, so wills and then power of attorney, which is really important. So in the UK, you can have, well, in England, it's different in different parts of the UK. In England, you can have a lasting power of attorney for health and welfare and a lasting power of attorney for finance and property. And what that is if you then became incapacitated and were unable to communicate for yourself, that person then steps in, and like your attorney steps in, and they are the ones who can make decisions. So, and again, it's not something we tend to think about at a young age. So I'm 42, and I've completed my I've done my health and welfare one. My finance and property one is going to be completed this month. And so we talk through how that goes, and so who's going to look after things, who would be basically your substitute decision maker. If you can't make the decisions, who's the hospital going to contact? If you haven't got a power of attorney, nobody's got a right to make decisions about your healthcare. If you're married, your spouse has no right, your next of kin has no right to make those decisions. So you need to have your lasting power of attorney in place. So we talk through those things, we talk through wills, and then I can put you in touch with relevant people to get some of those legal stuff done if you haven't already got those. We talk through advanced care planning. So how do you want to be cared for if something happens and you're no longer able to communicate that? So we talk you through ways to look at determining your life and death values. So what actually matters to you? So, and bearing in mind, I can't become a licensed facilitator until I've done every single part of this as well. Okay. So yeah, at the age of 41, 42, I sat down and worked through my life and death values and put together my advanced directive and my advanced statement about what I would like to happen to me, what treatments I would accept and in what circumstances, and what I wouldn't. And what's really interesting is in your advanced statement, so this is kind of your wishes. I kind of sat down and thought, at what stage does life become not worth living? At what stage do I not want life prolonging treatment? At what stage would I say that is enough? And it boiled down to the fact that if I can't have a nice cup of tea and I can't tell you, I can't communicate that, then that's probably enough. And it sounds so trivial, right? But I really, I've written this in the statement, and I've said, if I ask you for a cup of tea and you don't give me one, that's not good enough, right? If I ask you for a cup of tea and I'm at risk of aspirating because I've lost some of my swallow, and I say that I don't want thickener in my tea because I've got capacity to understand that I still might aspirate and get pneumonia and die. If I still say I want a cup of tea, I've got capacity to say that. Give me the cup of tea. And this comes back to when my granddad died when I think it was about 17 or 18, and he'd had a stroke. And so this is a good number of years ago, and we didn't have all the interventions and stuff that we have now. All he wanted was a cup of tea, and the nurses wouldn't let him have a cup of tea. So every time the nurses went out of the room, my grandma gave him a sip from her cup, and he died 2 weeks later. And he was always going to die 2 weeks later. So what was the harm in giving him a cup of tea?
Yeah.
And so we talk through a lot of this stuff, about, so what is important to you? And like I say, that idea of, for me, it comes down to a cup of tea. It does sound trivial, but there's a whole lot of other stuff around it. So my advance statement goes into all of that, and we talk about all of that as well. So then we go on to looking at what you might like to happen after you die. So how you want your body to be disposed of. And there are far more options than just burial or cremation. We talk about how you want your body cared for. Is that it? Do you want to be in a funeral home? Would you like to be cared for at home? And we'll talk about kind of the elements of the funeral service that are important to you. And it gives you a chance to put all these things down on paper. So the Before I Go Solutions method that I would take someone through goes through all of those stages. And like I say, it's an online course. But alongside that online course, you also get 7 hours coaching time with myself. There's like 7 elements, and then you get an hour's coaching time. That's the main package. There are other ways of doing it, and that can be done one-to-one in person. It can be done in groups in person, and it can also be done really effectively via Zoom, either one-to-one or groups. So you don't need to live anywhere near me for me to be able to help you. That can all be done via technology, or like I say, there are in-person elements that we can do as well. What I would suggest is, if you're beginning to think about it, I would definitely get your hands on this book. So that's going to give you some background reading, a really good fundamental kind of background of the things that you need to look at. You can also buy the workbook. Again, if you go on the Before I Go Solutions website, you can get the material. You can work through that yourself. You don't have to do the online course. And all the information about every element of this is available online somewhere. But being a facilitator, what my job is, it's like saying, instead of booking a holiday yourself by trawling through everything on the internet, you go to a travel agent, because they've got the knowledge and the experience. They know where to find things. So that's all I am, is I'm a travel agent to take you through your end of life planning and help you to have some
final
of those
destination.
Final destination. Not like the film though, that's a bit scary. But yeah, and to give you some tips and tricks and tools to use, because going through this means you're going to have some conversations with people. You can't just sit down on your own and write your plan, because you have to have other people who are going to enact that plan for you. So you have to have some of those conversations. So some of the things we talk about as well is, who would you like to be your power of attorney? Who would you like to look after your funeral stuff? And it might not be your spouse. It might not be, your next of kin. So for me, I have 2 people who are looking after everything for me, and one of them is Esther. So I have 2 friends who are looking after everything for me, who are down as my powers of attorney. They're down to look after all my funeral stuff and all that kind of thing. But the important thing is, if you're doing an end of life plan, and I really, really, really recommend you do, at any age, is that you revisit it every year, because something might change. Because at the moment, on my end of life plan, in my funeral, I say that I want Dancing by Kylie Minogue, because it's the words that when I go out, I want to go out dancing. And I want that song in my funeral. Now, if I don't die for another, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, which let's hope, then I might not want Dancing by Kylie Minogue. It might be a bit dated. So you just revisit it every year. And so, yeah. But what I would say is, if you want to chat more about this, you can absolutely get in touch with me. So I'm sure we can probably link my email address and stuff as well. But like I say, I'm Emma at dyingtohelp.co.uk, and I'll be super happy just to have some chat. Just like absolutely no obligation to sign up to anything, but just to give you some tips on, get the girls together, get your friends together, have a discussion, find out what it is you want, but start having those conversations. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm branching out. So my Dying to Help business is going to be covering obviously the funeral stuff, but also the end of life planning stuff. And then I am looking to add something else in the future, but that one's a bit of a secret at the moment.
Very good. Wow. I'm so pleased to have talked to you both. Thank you so much for sharing all that. And it's really actually excited me. I mean, the whole thing is meant to be breathing life into death. It's just, that's what you've done. You've helped to breathe life into death for us, to explain it, to make it less of a taboo, and to actually get it kind of exciting. Because for those of us who like to get things all ordered and lined up and things, it's another, we don't have it as a conscious thing pressing down on us, but it must always be a subconscious thing as we're getting older, just to, especially thinking about our family left behind, you want to get it all set up for them. So it is the most caring thing to do, like you said, to actually get thinking about it, so they haven't got it all on their shoulders. So thank you ever so much. I'm going to finish there, and hopefully we'll get to see each other again soon and maybe have some more chats like this, because I think they've been really popular. So thank you ever so much for joining us, and see you again soon.